Krishna Balaram. Although thousands of years had passed since Krishna's advent in Vrindavan, the same atmosphere and many of the same sights and sounds still prevailed. Hey, quiet. Hey, quiet. Thank you. Peacocks ran across the sands or sat on rooftops or in trees. The cooing and chirping of pigeons and cuckoos and the sweep of the parrots' green wings were eternal sounds and sights of Vrindavan forest. In Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Prabhupada had described how Krishna and Balaram and their cowherd friends played in Ramanreti and similar places. My dear friends, just see how this riverbank is extremely beautiful because of its pleasing atmosphere. And just see how the blooming lotuses are attracting bees and birds by their aroma. The humming and chirping of the bees in the forest is echoing throughout the beautiful trees in the forest. Also, here the sands are clean and soft. Therefore, this must be considered the best place for our sporting and pastimes. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, the playing of the cowherd boys with Krishna and Balaram as friends in Vrindavan is the highest spiritual realization, far beyond the ordinary religionist understanding of God. The supreme truth, whom some meditated upon as impersonal Brahman, others worshipped as the Supreme Almighty, and still others considered an ordinary living entity, was the eternal loving friend of the cowherd boys of Vrindavan. Only after many, many lifetimes of pious activities had they become eligible to join in the loving pastimes of Krishna and Balaram in Ramanreti. Our Krishna Balaram temple is situated in Ramanreti. Raman means Balaram. Reti means sand, right? So in the sand, Krishna and Balaram played in that area. Ramanreti. In establishing a temple of Krishna and Balaram, Prabhupada wanted to offer the peaceful transcendental atmosphere of Ramanreti to all the people, including visitors from abroad, commuters from Delhi, and his own disciples. Already he had received a letter from a major international travel agency requesting that he provide accommodation for tourists so that the ISKCON guest house could be included in official tours of spiritual India. People were always coming to India to tour the holy places. Unfortunately, most of the holy places were unauthorized or overrun by cheaters. ISKCON Center, therefore, would be very important, Prabhupada wrote. Have a European preaching center and try to enlist all the tourists and hippies who come to Vrindavan. Give them nice prasadam and engage them in chanting, cleaning the temple, and reading our books. Give them all facility for becoming devotees. So Srila Prabhupada outlines here what the preaching should be. That the European Preaching Center should try to enlist all the tourists and hippies to come to Vrindavan. Right? And what will they do? They'll take nice prasadam. Nice prasadam. And they can engage in chanting and cleaning the temple. Right? And give them all facility for becoming devotees. All facility. I can remember in our St. Louis temple, many people would come to the Sunday feast. So many hippies, other people, 100 people, 150 people. And if anyone wanted to spend the night, they could get up, go to Mangalarti. There was no problem, right? They can get a little taste of spiritual life. Right? And some of the persons who spent the night, they stayed, they never left. So this is our business, to engage people. I can remember at one time, not so much now, but some years ago, any guest that came for Darshanartik or Guru Puja, they could help sweep the floor. Remember that? They sweep, right? Take a broom and... Because by cleaning Krishna's temple, one cleans the heart, right? We have so many hired people cleaning, but actually that business is our business. Why? So that we get purified. All the dirty things within the heart. Number one dirty thing is that I think I am this body. I'm convinced I am this body. So by cleaning Krishna's temple, that misconception of life becomes cleansed away. There was another particular significance in Prabhupada's choosing Krishna and Balaram as the central object of worship in his Vrindavan temple. Lord Balaram is the first expansion from Lord Krishna, and in his incarnation of Sankarshan, he upholds all the universes. The Vaishnavas therefore worship Balaram for spiritual strength. You can pray to Lord Balaram, Prabhupada said, to help you in your deficiency. As the source of spiritual strength, Lord Balaram is also known as the original spiritual master. One time Srila Prabhupada was talking to the devotees, and he said, we have Krishna and Balaram. Who's the strongest of the two? Krishna or Balaram? It says here, Balaram's strength. So somebody said like that, Balaram, he's Bala, strength. And Prabhupada said, yes, but you see, he's leaning on Krishna's shoulder. Therefore, Krishna is the strongest. One time, just after the opening of the Krishna Balaram Mandir, devotees had come from all over the world, and Srila Prabhupada was next day on the morning walk after the installation. Srila Prabhupada had engaged the local Brahmins to install the deities, right? Not because they were so much required. We could do the installation, and the main part of an installation is the chanting of the holy name, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna. But just so that the local people in Vrindavan were confident that everything was done correctly, he brought in the Brahmins. And it was like a 5-day installation. Every day the Brahmins were chanting mantras, and Srila Prabhupada would come from his quarters at a certain time and sit, and the Brahmins would decorate his forehead with and chant so many mantras. Went on for a long time. Anyway, after the installation, oh yes, and at the time of the first artik, Prabhupada did the first artik for Krishna Balaram, around noon that day of the opening of the temple. And there were many police there because the governor of Uttar Pradesh, Mr. Reddy, was there in attendance. So many police there. The temple room was packed, mostly with our devotees, some outsiders also. And Srila Prabhupada was offering the artik, first artik to Krishna Balaram. And when he turned around to offer the lamp to all the devotees, he had this smile as big as the ocean. His smile was so big. I think there's photographs. He was so happy that now that Krishna Balaram were installed in Vrindavan. But when he was on the morning walk the next day, he said, now you have Balaram. Balaram is very merciful. Always pray to Balaram. He will relieve you of your material desires. As in Prabhupada's other large ISKCON temples, there were 3 altars, and besides Krishna and Balaram would stand the deities of Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda. Lord Chaitanya is Krishna himself, and Lord Nityananda is Lord Balaram. In fact, the Krishna Balaram Mandir would proclaim to the world. Lord Nityananda is especially referred to as the Kripa Avatar, the form of God most merciful to the fallen conditioned souls. Thus, the worship of Krishna and Balaram is Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda would emphasize distributing Krishna consciousness to others. Prabhupada also wanted to install deities of Radha Shyam Sundar along with their 2 attendant gopis, Lalita and Vishaka. First temple to have gopis installed was Krishna Balaram Mandir with Lalita and Vishaka. So the whole concept was very, very new to everyone, all the devotees. And we were used to having Radha and Krishna, but this was the first temple where there was Krishna and Balaram, and Radha and Krishna were on the right side and Gaur Nitai on the left side. So Srila Prabhupada was very particular about the worship, and our Narottam-Ananda, who was visiting at the time for the installation, somehow or another got installed as the head pujari there. So Srila Prabhupada had asked the devotees to see the worship in Radha Raman Mandir. He liked the worship there. The standard was very good. And he said we should have that same standard in our Krishna Balaram Mandir. And I was just thinking about one thing that was there in the very beginning, but I don't see it anymore. And I think we did it here for some time too when the temple first opened, was that they had different ghee wicks. The ghee wicks was like a long stick, and the cotton was rolled on the stick. It wasn't a small stall, it was about this long. And there were many of these ghee wicks. So it was very, you can see in the first artik that Srila Prabhupada did, there's a photograph. So it was very opulent that this ghee lamp didn't have just short little, it had these long ghee wicks in the offering. Srila Prabhupada could not possibly stay full-time in Vrindavan, yet whenever he was away, progress slowed. Gurudas, the temple president, had little money and little expertise in managing finances. Prabhupada called him Damn Cheap Baba, a name given by Indians to Westerners who think they have won a damn cheap bargain, although they are actually being cheated. Damn cheap Babas. Of course, it was wrong for the Loy Bazaar Walas to always cheat the foreigners, you know. But that's how business is, I suppose. Since Prabhupada did not trust the devotees' spending habits, he arranged for a complicated system whereby he would have to approve all ISKCON Vrindavan checks even while traveling. When Gurudas wanted to spend, what happened? When Gurudas wanted to spend money, what happened? Tejas had to come from Delhi and authorize the expenditure, because Tejas was really cheap. I mean, he was really cheap. He would, not even one paisa could go this way or that way for Tejas. So Prabhupada knew that, so he had Tejas come down from Delhi to authorize the expenditure. The Delhi temple president would come to Vrindavan and approve the expenses. Then Prabhupada was so careful about money, very, very careful. He didn't like to waste money at all. Then a check would be made out and mailed to Srila Prabhupada for his signature. When the check returned to Delhi, Tejas would add his own signature and give the check to Gurudas. Although Prabhupada generally preferred not to burden himself with managing his temples, he insisted on supervising all spending in Vrindavan, down to the last rupee. But even with such controls, Gurudas would misspend money, taking funds earmarked for construction and using them for other temple purposes, usually getting cheated by the merchants. After Prabhupada's 1972 visit during Kartik, he was away from Vrindavan for an entire year, directing things through correspondence. With the Krishna consciousness movement growing quickly on all continents, he had many places to visit. Still, his three main projects, Bombay, Vrindavan, and Mayapur, were his major subjects of correspondence and his greatest financial investments. One reason he did not come more often to Vrindavan was that Guru Das's letters had been very optimistic, promising a temple opening by Janmashtami 1973. I went there in 1974, Gaur Purnima time, and the only thing that was completed was Prabhupada's rooms. The rest was just a construction site. And Guru Das was promising, Janmashtami 73, everything would be ready. Sarabi was in charge of the construction and knew well that the work was going too slowly. Yet Guru Das would write to Prabhupada, painting a picture of eminent completion of the construction and opening of the mandir. Prabhupada was enlivened to hear the good news, and he held Guru Das to his promise, though with reservations. If you can finish the work by this is Prabhupada writing, if you can finish the work by Janmashtami next, that would be a very great credit for you, and I shall come from any part of the world just to install the deity. But now you must work very, very hard to make good your promise to me. Otherwise, I shall be very disappointed and become very, very angry upon you. Prabhupada warned the devotees in Vrindavan that they would have to work diligently, finishing before the monsoon season arrived in June, if they were actually to fulfill their promise. But everyone visiting the construction of Vrindavan could understand that the building would never be finished in time. The temple area consisted of foundation lines and steel rods. Only 3 or 4 devotees were living there, struggling to organize laborers and to obtain funds and building materials. That summer was extremely hot, and each day the devotees were forced to spend the afternoon lying down in their huts, exhausted from the heat. Prices for cement and steel had doubled, yet Prabhupada continued to respond to Guru Das's glowing reports, encouraging him to continue with determination. But Prabhupada could also read between the lines and he cautioned Guru Das, quote, "I simply want to see that the work is being carried on vigorously, and the money shall not be used to pay bad bills. The money should simply be used for construction." Talk of a temple opening by Janmashtami gradually disappeared, but Prabhupada did not express his disappointment. Rather, he continued to encourage and push the devotees onward, asking that at least his own room be completed so that when he visited on October of '73, he would have a place to stay. When Prabhupada arrived, however, the quarters were far from completion, and he had to live for a week in a home of a Vrindavan friend. He did not remove Guru Das, but he tried to teach him better management and accounting. He also wrote to his India GBC secretary, Tamal Krishna Goswami, to get more funds for the Vrindavan project. So I have arrived here in Vrindavan, but so far the project is concerned, why the money is so irregular. Tejas reports that in the past 3 months you have sent rupees 5,000, and since then nothing. So how will the project go on? Inspired by Prabhupada's presence, the devotees rallied. They held a little festival on the land, erecting a tent and decorating the foundation post with banana trees and flowers. For several evenings, Prabhupada lectured before a crowd of about 50 local people sitting on folding chairs in between the foundation lines. Prabhupada was determined in his desire. He wanted a temple as much as ever, and the small band of disciples in Vrindavan were convinced of their mission to erect that temple. They knew they were building a temple not merely as their own local project, but as something very important for the whole world. Prabhupada set the next Janmashtami, August 1974, as the new grand opening. But it really opened in Ram Navami 1975. Surabi had considerable architectural and construction experience, but he had never worked with such an ornate building before. He doubted, therefore, whether they could finish in a year's time. Tejas wondered whether they could raise the funds in time. Guru Das was becoming more competent, and he assured Prabhupada that they would meet their deadline. Subal had wanted to stay in Vrindavan, but only on the condition that he be relieved of management, free to chant and wander in the groves. But he had long since departed for the West. Those devotees who remained committed to Vrindavan knew that, at least for the present, the real spiritual path in Vrindavan was one of hard labor, anxiety, combating the elements, and working as pure instruments in the service of Krishna's pure devotee. In February 1974, as Prabhupada was traveling eastward from Los Angeles, he wrote Guru Das that he would like to come to Vrindavan as soon as his residential rooms were completed, and he asked when that would be. Guru Das consulted Surabi, who said 1 month. Trying to be more positive, Guru Das invited Prabhupada to come and move into his new quarters in 3 weeks. But Srila Prabhupada telegrammed back that he would be coming in 2. Same thing happened here, actually. Prabhupada came, and Prabhupada's old quarters were in one of the flats in the back. And when he came, the car stopped there. And Prabhupada said, "Why are we stopping here?" "No, Prabhupada, your room's not ready," Surabi told him. So Prabhupada said, I'm not going to the old place. I'll only go to the new place. So then the devotees were in anxiety, how to? And everybody went up there and started cleaning, and the lift wasn't working. So they got a chair. I think that chair is still up there. And after they cleaned everything, then they brought Prabhupada up the stairs, and he entered into his room. So it seems like it was a repeated pastime. At that time, Prabhupada's house had no roof or floor and only portions of the outer walls. Sarabi began a marathon construction effort and hired 2 work crews, one for day and one for night. 2 weeks non-stop they worked, drastically cutting corners. They plastered and painted simultaneously, and as a result, the walls remained wet. A few days before Prabhupada's arrival, they put down a temporary floor, bricks covered with cow dung, covered with rugs, covered with sheets. The weather was cold, and the house had no heating. The morning Prabhupada arrived, the devotees all gathered with him as he sat happily before his desk, praising their achievement. He said, if they could keep working like this, they could finish everything before Janmashtami. Almost immediately upon his arrival, Prabhupada began to manifest the symptoms of a cold, but he would not hear of moving to another place. This is my first house, he said. Now I'm going to stay here. The large brick and stone room was simple and austere and remained dark during most of the day, but Prabhupada considered it his Vrindavan residence. Soon, local distinguished visitors began calling on him, and he received them warmly, discussing Krishna consciousness hour after hour in his room. In the evenings, he would lecture there and hold a kirtan. Prabhupada had a problem to face in Vrindavan. Gurudas had informed him that Mr. S. wanted to take back 50 feet of the donated land, claiming the construction was not going quickly enough and that he had never intended to give the front portion. He was thinking of using it for shops, maybe even a petrol pump. Prabhupada was alarmed. For Mr. Sharaf to take back the front part of the property would ruin the temple scheme and make a farce of the gift. What good news was land without proper access to it? What good was land without proper access? Actually, that piece of land that Sharaf didn't give was right where the Samadhi is. And that portion up to the fence. He didn't give that. And the point is that that's right where Prabhupada picked for his Samadhi. You know? So he didn't give that, but Prabhupada's Samadhi was there, so what was he going to do? Finally, about his wife, he died, his wife, Gita Sharaf, she donated that land to ISKCON. Maybe 5 years before. And I think it was Daivi Shakti Mataji who preached to her, got her to donate. On further inquiry, Prabhupada learned that Gurudas had not yet received the actual deed. Prabhupada was greatly disturbed, yet he proceeded calmly and intently. Gurudas, he said, should immediately secure the deed from the registrar and construct a high brick wall around the property. Prabhupada's secretary wired Mr. Sharaf, who was away from Vrindavan. Hare Krishna, Prabhupada now in Vrindavan until 13th. Now settle up front piece as promised. Mr. Sharaf wired his reply. Front part of land will be used for other purposes as decided earlier. Letter follows. Suddenly it seemed that Prabhupada had another Bombay case on his hands. Mr. Sharaf's action, however, confirmed Prabhupada's urgency for completing the construction. Had the land been already walled and the temple built, there would have been no question of Mr. Sharaf's taking the land back. Prabhupada's followers could not see clearly his reasons for pushing them. He had been vigilant, even heavy and critical, but for good reasons. Maya's opposition to Krishna consciousness was always present, so that if the devotees let up for even a moment, they could suffer great losses. The Srila Prabhupada was always in a battle against the forces of Maya. As the Krishna consciousness movement was growing, obstacles were coming, and Srila Prabhupada was battling. Just like in the West, the devotees that were joining the temple, their parents were upset. So some of their parents would hire these, what they called deprogrammers, to kidnap their children, even though they were, of age, and then try to convince them through deprogramming not to be devotees, right? So this was happening in the West. And in India, it didn't have many qualified, experienced people, just the devotees from the West. And as we read, they were, difficult for them to get things done. They weren't used to the way things work in India. So Srila Prabhupada had a lot of tensions. But that tension was for Krishna. So he always remained calm and collective. Srila Prabhupada describes that because we have a material body, there'll be anxiety because it comes with the body. But we transfer that anxiety for the service of Krishna. We should be in anxiety for our service to Krishna. Otherwise, we'll be in anxiety anyway about something else. Right? What is that something else? My sense gratification. It's only two things. Because we got a body, guaranteed there's going to be anxiety. You know what I mean? If you transfer that anxiety for the service of Krishna, you're properly situated. But if you don't have that anxiety for your service to Krishna, then the anxiety is going to be for sense gratification. He said, Prabhupada said, see, I'm also in anxiety. I'm in anxiety to how to present Krishna consciousness so people will take it, how to protect the properties, anxiety, but for Krishna. The question, why hurry? Why be so anxious to build a temple right away? Should never have been asked. It was the question of the naive, the lazy. As long as the Krishna consciousness movement had no temple in Vrindavan, the threat would exist that there might never be a temple. I remember there was one temple. It's called the Pagala Baba Ashram, Pagala Baba. It's on the road that goes to Mathura, Pagala Baba. So that temple that construction of the temple, big building, but it never finished. For like 20 years, it was never finished. And Prabhupada had commented, he'll never finish. So if you don't do something and apply yourself to it, it can become so delayed that it may never happen. The common mentality is, Hare baad mein dekega, chalega, baad mein kar sakte hain, right? That creeps in. But Prabhupada never had that. Right now, Let's do it. Prabhupada wrote to a friend in Calcutta, this statement of K has given me much concern. He said personally to me that under dictation of Srimati Radharani, he has given the land to us in charity. We have invested already lakhs of rupees for constructing a temple. And now if he uses the front portion for other purposes, there will be great damage to the view of the temple. Kindly see Mr. N.S. brother of K and settle this up so we can go in our progressive construction work. Kindly treat this as very urgent. So that's always one way to get things done. You have some dispute with one person, you go to a friend of his who may even know his brother or some relative, and you get that guy to become like they call the madhyam, mediator, and try to settle it up, right? Can learn everything from this Lilamrta, all about how to get things done, how to proceed in a difficult situation. In Mr. Sharaf's absence from Vrindavan, Prabhupada took the opportunity to speak to Mr. Sharaf's brothers as well as with Mr. Sharaf's lawyers. What had been given in the name of Srimati Radharani informed them could not be taken back. Mr. Sharaf's associates agreed, at least for the moment, that Mr. Sharaf had no substantial position. Meanwhile, the laborers were working quickly to build a 12-foot high wall around the property. It was 4 a.m. Prabhupada sat in the cold darkness with a small desk lamp shining before him. Having risen from bed at 2 and come into his main room to dictate Srimad Bhagavatam purport, he now sat silently. He wore a wool knit hat pulled over his ears, a sweater, and a gray wool charter around his shoulders. On the other side of the double doors sat his servant, peeking in to see what his spiritual master was doing. On Prabhupada's last visit to the United States, he had acquired a new secretary servant, Satsvarup Das Goswami. Despite the cold, Prabhupada's new assistant was happy to be in Vrindavan and so intimately situated close to his spiritual master. Prabhupada rang his bell. The servant jumped up, opened the doors, and entered the room. In the far corner of the large room, seated at the desk, he saw Prabhupada looking grave and mystical, his beautifully intense eyes sparkling. As Satsvarup offered obeisances, he thought of his great fortune in being there with his spiritual master. When he sat up, he saw Prabhupada nod slightly, and he felt that Prabhupada was acknowledging his servant's good fortune. Sitting on the floor on the other side of the desk, Satsvarup Maharaj faced with Srila Prabhupada. In awe and reverence, he tensed, prepared to do whatever Prabhupada requested, yet fearful that the request might be something he wouldn't know how to do. "Get the Krishna book, volume 2, Prabhupada said. His servant ran, got it from the shelf, returned, and again sat down. "Read the story of King Nriga," Prabhupada said. Though terse, Prabhupada's commands were complete. His servant paused, wondering if there was anything else. He opened the book, then hesitated out loud. "Out loud?" he asked. Prabhupada nodded, and his servant began to read aloud. Soon, however, Satsvarup became puzzled as to why Prabhupada was having him do this so early in the morning, when he was usually dictating Srimad Bhagavatam. As Satsvarup read it aloud, Prabhupada sat motionless, giving no indication that he was pleased or even listening. In that silence, Satsvarup became very aware of his own voice reading, and he listened intently to the story. King Nriga, the story explained, gave many cows and charities to the Brahmins. One day, however, One cow wandered back and entered among King Nriga's herd. And so the king unknowingly gave it in charity to another Brahmin. But as the new owner was leading the cow away, the former owner returned to claim it. An argument ensued between the two Brahmins. Coming before King Nriga, they charged that he had taken back a cow previously given in charity, a great sin. The puzzled King Nriga very humbly offered each Brahmin 100,000 cows in exchange for one cow. Neither accepted. However, since, according to Manu's law, a Brahmin's property cannot be taken away under any condition, even by the government, consequently both Brahmanas left in anger. As a result, King Nriga had to take his birth as a chipgali, lizard, right? Chipgali. As Prabhupada's servant read on, he suddenly got the feeling that Prabhupada had asked him to read this story to expose the cheating of his own servant. In a panic, he tried to think of how he had committed the offense of stealing from his spiritual master. He couldn't think of anything wrong until he recalled having taken a pair of socks which had been given to Prabhupada as a gift. Prabhupada was always receiving gifts wherever he went, and it was his practice, after collecting socks and scarves and so on, to give them to his disciples. Prabhupada was used only a fraction of the things given to him. So because it was cold in Vrindavan, Satsvarup had no socks, had taken one inexpensive-looking pair that he was sure his spiritual master would never want to use. He had assumed that Prabhupada would not object, but now his cheating was indirectly exposed. After the story was completed, Prabhupada remained silent, as did his servant. Perhaps Prabhupada is sleeping, Satsvarup thought, though he dared not say anything or even move. They both sat motionless, Satsvarup looking down at the book and sometimes up at Prabhupada, waiting for indication. 5 minutes passed. Finally, Srila Prabhupada said, "Now take this chapter and type it up." His servant acknowledged the instruction and got up to leave, but still it wasn't clear. Why had he read the story and why type it? Prabhupada then spoke again. "Now I want to dictate one letter." Satsvarup had a notepad with him, and he sat down and immediately began writing Prabhupada's words. The letter was to Mr. Sharaf, and Prabhupada referred to Mr. Sharaf's donation of land and to his desire to take back the front 50 feet. He reminded Mr. Sharaf that according to the original agreement, he had given the entire land with the sanction of Srimati Radharani. How could he say that now he was taking it back? Mr. Sharaf could please reconsider what he was proposing. In this connection, Prabhupada was enclosing the story from Srimad Bhagavatam of King Nriga. Mr. Sharaf could read it and consider the implications. Prabhupada's servant felt relieved, but he also felt that his guilt was valid and that he should be wary of becoming too familiar with his spiritual master's possessions. And he learned another lesson as well. His own viewpoint of Prabhupada was entirely subjective. Although he had been with Prabhupada, he had not correctly understood Prabhupada's thoughts and motives. He felt that perhaps he was not the only disciple who sometimes made that mistake. One may try to comprehend the many aspects of Srila Prabhupada, but one should not expect to understand completely. Even GBC secretaries and other leading devotees who were right with Prabhupada in his dealings could not know what Prabhupada was thinking. Satsvarup Maharaj decided that it was best to always follow Srila Prabhupada's instructions and going back to the adjoining room, he began typing the story of King Nariga. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's Vaishnava Kriya Mudra. It's very difficult to know the mind of a Vaishnava, right? And certainly that was true in dealing with Srila Prabhupada. Their thought process is very, very deep. They're functioning on many different platforms at the same time. It's described in Chaitanya Charitamrita that although the spiritual master is sitting on the Vyasasana and instructing his disciples, at the same time, in his heart of hearts, he's serving Radha and Krishna in his particular relationship that he has with Krishna. So working on many different platforms and dealing with many things at the same time. So we never can really completely understand the mind of a Vaishnava, especially a elevated Vaishnava, Nitya Siddha like Srila Prabhupada. So it's always better to take the position of trying to understand his instructions and try to follow them as carefully as we can. That will be the safest position. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta ki. Srila Prabhupada ki. Ekadasi Brata ki. Nitai Gaur Premanandi.